Newsfirst Newsline.
Hello there, very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Newsline Live. Today's program is a continuing coverage, of course, of the recent piece of legislation that was passed in Parliament, the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Bill. Now, we haven't had much discussion on the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Bill before the passage of the bill, simply because there was a huge hurry to pass this piece of legislation. But however, now that it has been passed, we have the freedom and the time to discuss the mistakes that we have made in the past, or the good that has been done in the past. The importance of this is that everything is in the past, and we need to start looking at the future as well. Well, to discuss the Port City Economic Commission Bill, we have with us today Bhavani Fonseka, the senior research person at the Center for Policy Alternatives. A very good evening, madam, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
First questions first. The Center for Policy Alternatives did challenge the Port City Economic Commission Bill while it was on the Gazette before it was passed into the law, and the Center for Policy Alternatives was a part. Submissions made by the Center for Policy Alternatives were included in the Supreme Court determination. On which grounds, just briefly, did you challenge this bill on, so that we could get an idea of what the Center for Policy Alternatives sees as the mistakes or the shortcomings in this bill?
So Sharlan, thanks for having me. I think it's very important to understand that the bill, when it was challenged on particular issues of constitutionality. So in court we could only raise legal issues in terms of what violated the Constitution. It wasn't on every issue, on every policy issue, and that we can talk about a bit late in the program. I think there'll be time. But in terms of the challenge in the Supreme Court, CPA was the first to challenge on that day, and we should talk about the process as well. But we felt there were very serious concerns in terms of the bill that was gazetted in March, and we raised issues of the role of Parliament or lack of it, and that there needed to be Parliament oversight. There were concerns in terms of accountability, about transparency, and language which was raising questions of vagueness. And so there was a whole spate of things we raised. Now, the Supreme Court had, I think, around 19 petitions, as well as intervening petitions. So there were several who challenged and those who supported. And I think you were also in court, you saw several days of debate, and there were lots of discussions that was raised around particular clauses. The Supreme Court, the determination, we only found out on the 18th last week, just a day before this week. Yeah, I forget, there's been so much that's happened, but just a day before the debate. So we had a 73-page bill that was challenged in the Supreme Court, 5 days of hearing, and then 1 day to study what the determination entailed, and then 2 days to debate. The members of Parliament had 2 days to debate. So there's a lot of questions in terms of the rushed, as you mentioned, the rushed manner. But in terms of what was raised in the Supreme Court, much of it was captured in the determination, but there were other areas that wasn't captured. But in a nutshell, those are the issues. But,
well, we need to move forward from the legal matters, because the Supreme Court dealt with the constitutionality of this bill, but according to what you said, and according to the stance of the Center for Policy Alternatives, there is more than just a compatibility with the Constitution at stake here. So besides the legal challenges that you have already made, you've had your day in court, what other shortcomings does the Center for Policy Alternatives see in this piece of legislation? So
a couple of issues, and I would say let's start with the process. And I think that's a very important point, not just with this bill or this law now, but with several other issues as well, in terms of how much time a citizen has in terms of looking at, studying, engaging with a particular law. And the Port City Bill was gazetted in March and was tabled in Parliament just before the New Year, a couple of days before. And soon after the tabling, we realized there were public holidays. So there was actually, though 7 days is provided in the Constitution to challenge a bill, citizens only had 1 day in the midst of a new year, in the midst of many having...
In the midst of court holidays.
Court holidays, New Year, having gone out of town. So there was just a complete lack of transparency, a rush to challenge, and questions were raised as to why this rush was happening. But the lawmaking process, I think, is something we really, when you look at this bill, raises a lot of questions. The timing, it's not just because it was the new year and this was taken up, but also we are in the midst of a pandemic. Is this the priority when we have a pandemic in terms of the priorities of this government? So even now we're in the midst of third wave, we have a lockdown coming up. And just before that, you have a 2-day debate, and this is in the midst of cases rising every day. But back to the lawmaking process, so you had a rush process to challenge. We had 5 days of hearing, and then a day before the debate, you find out what the determination is. So the lawmaking process, I would say, in terms of the timing, it was extremely, extremely limited so that citizens could engage debate. We are unaware, and correct me if I'm wrong here, of any public debate happening around this bill. You know, in terms of the government presenting their case. I know media entities have organized debates, but really taking it out to the people. So, you know, very limited conversation, and not just in Colombo, but outskirts, you know, when you have so many competing issues. This was
But of course, on that point, there is only so much that you can do, so far that you can take this debate when, like you said before, the country is grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic at the current rate that the cases are rising. Bhavani, there was an argument that was constantly reiterated. This revolves around the sovereignty of Sri Lanka, the sovereignty of Sri Lankans. Now, this has constantly been used as a trump card by oppositions that have been there are oppositions in parliament throughout the years, despite which government comes into power. So when it comes to the current government that's in power, I can remember quite rightly when Arjuna Mahendran was the governor of the central bank, they completely opposed appointing of foreign nationals to senior positions of government. However, their opposition has gone out the back door. Now they are in power. Well, they passed the 20th Amendment allowing dual citizens to be members of parliament, make decisions on behalf of the country, and now they have allowed dual citizens to be members of the Port City Economic Commission. What is the stance of the Centre for Policy Alternatives on this matter?
So we raised this at the very outset when we challenged it, not in court, because this is a court, as I said, is looking at constitutionality issues, but we raised this as a bigger policy issue. This government has been very consistent in terms of rejecting foreign involvement, and if you looked at the UNHRC process, a commitment made in 2015 was to have foreign judges and foreign lawyers involved in the special court. Now there was this outrage at that time saying this is going to be a threat on the sovereignty of Sri Lanka, this is against the constitution. Now we at that time made the point there's nothing to bar in the constitution having foreign judges or foreign lawyers working in Sri Lanka. But this passionate, pushback was seen then, was seen recently, but very suddenly with the Port City Bill, you see this enthusiasm to get foreigners involved in this process. And as we've pointed it out, this is the most involved that one could have foreigners in a particular entity in Sri Lanka. Now, as a result of the Supreme Court determination, the Attorney General's Department came with several amendments to this bill. One was to have majority members who are Sri Lankans in the Commission. So I would say we need to also look at the amendments that were brought in, because what was gazetted in March has significantly changed because of these amendments. And I would say the Supreme Court took note of the concern. So while there were problems with the process, the fact that the courts were able to hear various parties also ensured that the bill has actually at least some safeguards. But on the whole issue of the foreign involvement, I want to just make this very point. There was this passionate defense of nationals earlier. And we had the secretary, the counsel for the secretary to the president in the Supreme Court, I think you were also there, who came and said, no, we can have foreign judges, including the Chief Justice, who could be a foreigner, who could be non-Sri Lankan. So, you know, you have a U-turn of the government when it's convenient to them. So I think with any government policy, I would say we need to be very, very mindful that things can change to serve particular interests.
So this idea of Sri Lanka's sovereignty being compromised. Now, we discussed on how successive governments, while they're in opposition, use it as a trump card to defeat whatever government is in power, but when they come back into power, they repeat the same thing. Is there any truth to the compromise of sovereignty of Sri Lankans by allowing foreigners to be members of this commission?
So I think one needs to look at the law now and the powers of the commission and the composition. So as I mentioned, the law now provides for 5 to 7 members. The amendment says most of them can be should be Sri Lankans. So that amendment was brought in. But there's still questions in terms of this all-powerful commission. They have broad powers, from regulatory powers to approving the master plan to approving environment standards. There are some criteria given, but the question is, who are these individuals going to be? So the implementation of this law is going to be key. Who is going to be appointed to the commission? Would their interests be for the benefit of the Sri Lankans, of Sri Lanka, or would they have vested interests? And a concern we have is there could be conflict of interest in these individuals who are appointed. So, you know, we've had the law passed, Sharlan, but I think the more important stage of this is the implementation. Who's going to be in the commission? How are they going to be selected? The president has the power to appoint
anyone he wants.
Anyone he wants, as well as remove. So he has immense power over this commission. The commission has immense powers as well. So really, whose benefit is going to be looked into or priority by this commission, how they're going to operate? These are the big questions I think that we need to look into. Now that the law has passed, it's the next phase which is critical. And I hope one issue is we had a rush process with the lawmaking process. I just hope there's more greater transparency in the next phase of this.
So, well, given the fact that the president will appoint all the members of this commission, would I be right in saying that the success or the failure of this port city project in large could be attributed to the president?
Could be, because he has the power to appoint. He also has the power to issue regulations, and I think this is going to be a key area that we also need to look at, because the regulations really will define how this commission works and how things work in the commission. Now,
and how things work in the port city.
In the port city, so it's a lot of power. So the law as it stands says the president, in consultation with the commission and regulatory authorities, can issue regulations. Those regulations only get presented to Parliament in 3 months. So that's
for the information of Parliament.
For the information, I mean, Parliament at least has a role, but for 3 months, Parliament doesn't have a role. So it's the executive arm. So it's a very, very important area that we need to all study. I mean, as citizens, I think it's very important to monitor and scrutinize and question. And I'm glad you're doing these programs, because I think a lot more people need to understand the different dynamics. But yes, I think this is going to be a very executive-heavy project.
Well, we'll continue this discussion on the Port City project and, more importantly, the Port City Economic Commission bill that was passed in Parliament after this short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Newsline live.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
There is where you are, and there is where you want to get to. In between, you need a bridge. bridges can be technology, knowledge, connections. ECU is the bridge between your world and the whole world.
Island-wide travel restrictions from midnight. President takes several decisions to minimize the economic impact. Impose a 2-week lockdown to control the pandemic. A request by 4 medical bodies. SLPP says Port City Bill did not receive 2/3 majority due to miscalculation. Nisanka Senadipati and 7 others acquitted from avant-garde case.
News First headlines. Main sponsor.
Newsfirst Newsline.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline Live. Of course, as usual, we provide space on Newsline Live for questions from our viewers, and we have received a few questions. I'm going to toss a few to you, Bhavani. First question is, was the bill passed? When it was passed, were the necessary amendments included in the bill as per the determination? And also, there were a few amendments that were proposed by the SJB as well.
So several amendments were proposed by the Attorney General during the Supreme Court hearing, and these are the amendments that got captured in the determination. So I believe, I mean, I think the issue to realize is that there were so many amendments that we need to see the final product to understand whether everything was taken on board and how that reflects in the final act. So we don't have this copy yet, but I believe all the amendments that were captured in the determination were discussed and brought into the final product. As you said, Sharlan, the SJB, I think, introduced 8 amendments, none of which were factored. I mean, there was a discussion, but the government refused to bring those in. So it was really what was presented by the Attorney General in the Supreme Court, which was captured in the determination, as far as I understand.
Just one more question before we move on to the discussion that we were having. The ruling party allowed only 1 day for public to challenge the Port City Act. Can the public challenge this at the Supreme Court to cancel?
Can one challenge it now?
Can one challenge the fact that people were only given 1 day?
Okay, so I think that's a public debate, and it goes back to, again, this lawmaking process I alluded to. We only have as citizens 7 days to challenge a bill, and that in itself is a very limited time.
This period was reduced
exactly.
from
so with
14 days to 7 days by the 20th Amendment.
Yeah, but we've always had the 7-day rule in terms of challenging bills.
Oh, that was to keep it on the order paper of Parliament.
Exactly. So we've always had 7 days, and we've had challenges in that. But this one was unique in that there was only 1 day for us to file papers in the Supreme Court, and as you pointed out, this was in the midst of a New Year period where many were not in Colombo or couldn't go and challenge it personally. So it shut a lot of people from engaging with this process, a critical process that citizens have. But that said, several did challenge, 19 petitioners and intervening parties. So, you know, there was a lot of interest in terms of engaging with this bill.
Also, this is not a piece of legislation that deals with the internal matters of Sri Lanka alone. This is one of the projects that will define Sri Lanka in the international community, how we interact with the international community, how we interact with major powers in the world that can really shift the balance. As we all know, there is a geopolitical tug of war taking place in the Indian Ocean area. We know the countries that are involved, and one of these major powers is a key investor in the Sri Lanka, in the Colombo Port City project. What does the Centre for Policy Alternative think about how this bill and the provisions in it, allowing also foreigners to be part of this commission, really impact on the geopolitical struggle that Sri Lanka is unfortunately a part of right now?
So that's an important question, Sharlan, and again I think we need to see how this plays out. But just what we've seen in terms of the bill stage, those who've been very much involved in promoting
nationalism,
promoting the bill and the project also raises questions as to who is to gain from this project. But I would say, we need to go back to what the president said when he was elected to office. He spoke about a neutral foreign policy. But what we've seen over the months raises questions of neutrality, or whether we have a different understanding of neutrality to what he meant. So this project is heavily backed by China, and we even now have boards that have come up in this area which doesn't have Tamil as a language. It's in Sinhala, English, and I believe Mandarin. So it raises the question whether there is a growing influence of China, not just in this project, but in so many other areas, and whether it's going to have a huge impact in geopolitics, in foreign policy. And we believe it does in terms of what we have seen so far. But I raise this issue. We've only seen the bill being enacted and the noise around that stage.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Tip of the iceberg, just the commencement of, I think, a very interesting road ahead. But
interesting or concerning?
Well, I would say interesting, because I think it's also upon us to monitor, to critique, to raise these issues. Because if Sri Lanka is now becoming over-reliant or dependent on one country, that's going to have huge implications. And this project, I believe, is heading that direction. It's extremely troubling.
Bhavani, on this same line, I'm going to pose to you a question that has been sent in by one of our viewers. The Port City Act has already passed in Parliament. Now, what is the benefit to the general public in discussing this bill anymore? It's already law in Sri Lanka. Why discuss it?
I think it's going to be very important to discuss it. I think it's even more important now to really understand what this commission is going to be doing, what kind of regulations are going to be done, how it's going to impact the citizenry. So for example, if you're going to have some foreigners come in and decide on this very powerful commission, how is that going to impact Sri Lankans? How is it going to benefit Sri Lankans on the whole, or is it to benefit a few? Are particular projects that are implemented going to have an adverse impact in terms of Sri Lankans, in terms of our own national interests? So I think now is the time. The implementation of this bill or this law is going to be the most important stage, where we not just observe, but we fully engage.
So moving forward, the government has huge plans for this project. The government sees this as a turning point to save the economy of Sri Lanka. Would it be possible for the government to really do that if maybe additional regulations are brought in to ensure transparency in the future in the form of a different act?
So I think it's important to understand that we need initiatives that bring in investment, that is supportive or promotes the economic generation. Those aspects are extremely important, but how it's done is going to be the issue. So in terms of the Port City project, now it has been billed as this new initiative that is going to bring in investment, but our concern is that this project that they are proposing also raises questions where there could be loopholes, there could be opportunities provided for potentially money laundering. So who is going to benefit this? So yes, the economic dimension is important for all Sri Lankans, but if this project is geared only to support a few, that raises many other questions.
Bhavani, there is also another question that has come in from one of our viewers, and this specifically I would pose to you because you are representing the Center for Policy Alternatives here. The question goes like this. This is not the first time the transparency of a bill was questioned. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution was also rushed. Civil organizations like the CPA were silent. Is the CPA against this bill as it was tabled by the Rajapaksas?
Just to be very clear, we have not been silent in the last few years. So CPA is 25 years old this year. We have been consistent in challenging, critiquing bills under successive governments. So
I believe the question raised was specifically about the 19th Amendment.
Yeah, so 19th Amendment too, we have critiqued it, we have engaged with that process, and we raised concerns as to the changes that were also at that time brought in during committee stage amendments as well. So Port City, we went to court. We have gone to court on challenging the 20th Amendment. We've challenged other bills. I would say CPA would be easily counted as the one who has been consistently challenging bills under successive governments, because there are problems. I don't think there's one government that gives that perfect bill that no one has to challenge. But not just challenging in court, one can also critique it in other ways. So we find going to court is one avenue, but issuing statements, ensuring that issues are raised in the public domain, those are all very important in terms of engaging and monitoring and scrutinizing. What I come back to with this process, the present process, is that there's really limited time to do this. And it was such a rush process that we all had to do it as fast as we could. So one would say we may have critiqued some and not the others. I would beg to differ and say we have been consistent in challenging successive governments.
But during the premiership of Ranil Wickremesinghe, did the CPA also challenge these matters in court and engage in the court process?
Of course, and that's what I say. We are consistent in terms of challenging several bills, not just bills though. We've also challenged arbitrary action, discriminatory action. So for example, I mean, we are at the moment looking at a whole spate of litigation done in the last 25 years. And I would say a lot was done in the last 5 to 6 years when we felt there was also space to engage constructively. There was interest to engage. So under the what was termed the Hapalane government, we were constantly in court, but we've been constantly in court under so many governments. So I think...
But not for the 19th Amendment?
19th Amendment, we were not in court, but we critically engaged with that process.
Right. Well, that's a wrap of Newsline Live for tonight. Thank you very much, Bhavani Fonseka, for joining us on our show and explaining these matters to the general public. Thank you very much to all our viewers for tuning in to Newsline Live as usual. We will see you again, same time, same place, but on Monday. Until then, take care, stay home, stay safe, follow all the health guidelines, and let's make it out of this pandemic together. Take care and God bless.